Hey guys, I'm your host Tara A. Devlin, and welcome to this week's episode of Kowabana, true Japanese scary stories from around the internet. After the last few episodes have featured some rather lengthy stories, I thought this week we'd highlight a few shorter ones again, delving into one of my favourite topics, Japanese ghosts. Who doesn't love a good ghost story? We don't always know how or why they're there, but it's usually never for anything good. To kick off this week's stories, we're heading to an old apartment building that is, perhaps, hiding something terrible in its long history. This one's called, I Wonder If They'll Come Outside. This happened to a friend and I when we were university students. This friend lived on the top floor of an 8-story apartment building. He was renting a 3-bedroom apartment and lived with 2 other roommates. All of the apartments in the building shared the same layout, so there were other students sharing apartments just like them, and there were families who lived there as well. I went over to his place numerous times, and while it might sound a little rude, it wasn't the nicest place around. I think old-fashioned is probably the best word to describe it. It wasn't like it was dirty, but the building was old and deteriorating, so it couldn't be helped. And how can I put it? It wasn't very well maintained either. None of the trees on the lot were pruned, and the place didn't really feel like somewhere you wanted to enter. Because my friend lived on the 8th floor, of course, you had to use the elevator to go up there. That elevator was old as well, and the first time I took it, I was worried it would stop suddenly on the way up. I pressed the button and waited for the elevator to arrive. As I went to step in, a small boy suddenly rushed over. He must have been around 4 or 5 years old. He was small and cute, too small to reach the buttons. Watching him try to reach was adorable and made me want to help him. "What floor do you want?" I asked. 6, he answered cheerfully. I pushed the button for the 6th floor, and then he said, I wonder if they'll come outside. He smiled innocently, and then rushed off once the elevator arrived. He pushed the doorbell for room 603, and then waited by the door. I continued up to my friend's apartment, room 803, and we had some drinks inside. The night wore on and we ran out of sake, so I decided to visit the supermarket next door to grab a few more drinks and snacks. It was already 3 a.m. by that point. I probably should have gone home to sleep at that point rather than continue drinking, I thought to myself as I finished shopping, and then I got back on the elevator. As I did, that boy from earlier in the day came running in again. I was drunk, sure, but I still couldn't help but wonder why such a small child would be out so late at night. You wanted the 6th floor, right? I asked. No, 7, he replied. Huh? Did I remember it wrong? I pressed the button for the 7th floor anyway, and when we arrived, the little boy ran out and pressed the button for room 703. Then he waited by the door. I wonder if they'll come outside, he said. Feeling a little creeped out, I returned to my friend's apartment and told him what happened. 603? Yeah, one of the guys from the futsal club lives there, but he doesn't have a kid. Just in case, he decided to give this friend a call, even knowing it would be a nuisance at such a late hour. Yeah, I heard the bell ring earlier today, but when I looked through the peephole, I didn't see anyone there, his friend said. The two of us looked at each other. It was already 4:30 a.m. Time to get to bed, we thought. But then, the doorbell rang. A chill ran down my spine, and my heart started beating faster. Instinctively, I knew that we shouldn't answer the door. I'm gonna go just have a quick look outside, my friend said, and I should have stopped him, but he started making his way towards the front door. he quickly came back. "What did you see? Was that kid there?" I asked. "No, I didn't see anyone," he said. I was relieved, but before that feeling had time to sink in, my friend continued. "I didn't see anyone, but as I got closer to the door, I heard a voice. It sounded like a small kid saying, 'I wonder if they'll come outside.'" I never visited that friend's house again after that, and after he graduated, he moved as well. I wonder what would have happened if he'd opened the door that night. Japanese spirits have a fondness for attaching themselves to people and following them wherever they go. There's no escape. Or is there? As the boy in this next story discovers, he might have gotten lucky. Really lucky. Find out why in I Think We Brought Something Back. This is my first time writing here, so it might be a little awkward, and it might not be the scariest story ever. Sorry. This happened during the summer of my 3rd grade of elementary school. I lived way out in the countryside, and every year the local youth organization held a party for Tanabata. Tanabata had already passed, but we all gathered and took part in quizzes, made curry together, and so forth. It was fun. In general, just us kids took part, and it was held in the small shrine office of the local shrine. There were several adults who helped us and managed the fire as well. This particular year, it was my mum's turn as the adult on duty, and together with T-san, the mother of another boy from my class, they got all the ingredients together, cleaned the office, and so on. It was around 9 p.m. by the time the gathering finished. Our area had a north side and a south side that was split by a mountain. The shrine office and most of the kids lived on the north side, while my house was on the south. The kids who lived on the north side rode their bikes home, while those of us from the south were driven home. The last people there were my mother and I, and T-san. T-san lived on the north side, so her kids went home first, but I couldn't go home alone, so I had to wait for my mum to finish. When they were done, they locked up the office and we went to leave. "Ah, I think I forgot to turn the lights off in the toilet," my mum said. "Do you want me to go and take a look?" T-san asked. No, I'll go check. You can go home now." "I can't do that." They argued for a bit, and in the end, T-san ended up riding her bike home. My mother unlocked the shrine office and went in to check the toilet lights. They were off. She locked up again, and this time we got in the car. I think it was around 10 p.m. by this point. Yet, the engine refused to start. Mum turned the key over and over. Maybe the battery's dead. Eh? Oh, it won't start. What are we gonna do? It would take about 30 minutes to walk home from the shrine. I didn't really want to walk through the countryside this late at night. Dad would no doubt come pick us up if we called him, but nobody had mobile phones at the time. All we could do was head back into the shrine office and borrow theirs. Mum told me to get out, and we both reached for our door handles. The door made a sound like it had opened, but it didn't. I rattled it again and again, but the door wouldn't open. It's hard to explain, but it felt strange. It wasn't that the door wasn't budging. It kind of felt like someone was pushing against it from the outside, keeping it shut. It was pitch black and there was nobody there other than my mum and I. Both my mother and I pushed as hard as we could against the doors. I got so scared that I started to cry, and I screamed at my mother. "Why won't it open? I want to go home!" "Hold on," she said, but she was panicking as well. Now that I think about it, Would a car really shake that much with only 2 people inside struggling to open the doors? Huffing and puffing, my mother tried starting the car again several times, and then, finally, it roared to life. "Make sure the door is shut properly," she said. I checked, but the door still wasn't open, so there wasn't much I could do about it. There were 2 ways to get home from the shrine. We could return clockwise or counterclockwise. Counterclockwise took us through the mountains past a graveyard. Farmers were the only people who went out that way during the day, so there were no streetlights. Clockwise took us through the northern residential area to the prefectural road, so although it was the long way around, it would have streetlights and probably few cars at this time of night. Neither of us wanted to go the counterclockwise way, so we took the other route home and stopped by a convenience store on the way. It wasn't a big store, but we had few retail stores out this way, and being the countryside, it wasn't open 24 hours either. It closed at midnight. I don't know why we stopped by the convenience store. Maybe Mum wanted a break in a well-lit, populated area. I asked her about it later, and she just said because she wanted to stop there. She stopped the car in the parking lot and nervously reached for the door handle. It opened normally, and mine did too. Relief washed over me. We bought some ice cream and then finally returned home. That was the end of that day's adventures, but ever since then, there's been something that bothers me. There's an intersection near that convenience store we stopped at, and after that, it saw a lot of accidents. I always passed through it on my way to elementary and junior high school, and because there were traffic and pedestrian lights, nothing terribly major ever happened there. But after that day, I saw police cars at that intersection numerous times on my way to school. I've said this several times, but we lived in the middle of nowhere. It wasn't like the intersection had an obstructed view, nor was there a lot of traffic. Our town in general saw few accidents, but for some reason, this intersection alone suddenly saw a dramatic increase in them. There were small accidents and large accidents, and once every 2 or 3 years, there was an accident large enough that saw several people die. Honestly, for the size of our town, it was strange. When I was in high school, a boy in the grade below me died there as well. A car drove into the convenience store one time as well. Several delinquents were hanging out in front by the vending machines, and they were badly injured. It might be nothing more than a coincidence, but there's one more thing that's been on my mind too. It happened to T-san, who went home before us. Her son, the one 2 years younger than me, died at the beginning of that winter. For the first few days it seemed like he just had a cold, but when T-san went to wake him up, she found his body was already cold. They never discovered the cause of death, although they chalked it up to complications from the cold. But I think we all brought something back with us from that shrine that night. T-san rode home on her bike, and one of her children died. We stopped by the convenience store, and, as far as I know, over 10 people have now died in that area. We had a mini truck. Maybe more than one thing got on board. Maybe the reason we couldn't start the car or open the doors was because they were keeping us there until they were all ready to go. And that might be why the car rocked back and forth so much. Then they got off at the convenience store. If we'd gone straight home instead, the thought alone gives me chills. Abandoned houses can be found all over Japan, and they're a favoured setting for ghosts. If a ghost is going to reside anywhere, a creepy abandoned building would be the perfect place for it, right? The young man in this next story gets in over his head when he takes his friends to visit a terrifying house from his childhood, however, and none of them will ever be the same again. Find out why in Mysterious Abandoned House. When I was a high school student, I was forced to work a morning newspaper delivery route due to certain circumstances at home. The job started at midnight and went until early morning, meaning my imagination was always in overdrive and places that looked normal during the day were terrifying at night. Yet there was one place in particular that was creepy even in the light of day. It wasn't on my delivery route, but there was an abandoned house in the same area that people claimed was haunted. Nobody had lived in it for the last 15 years, and it was falling apart at the seams. Sometimes I had to deliver to the house next to it, and whenever I rode past it, I was overcome with this disgusted feeling. One day, I passed by it as always to deliver something to the next house, and a chill ran down my spine. There was a telephone pole in front of the abandoned house's gate, and in the shadows stood what looked like a child. The child was leaning out from behind the pole, looking at me. I froze. Then the child suddenly screamed and pointed behind me. "Daddy!" What the hell? They're out for a walk at this time? I thought. Relieved, I turned around and, about 4 meters away, a massive shadow stood, looking at me. The child suddenly burst out laughing, bringing me back to my senses. I started pedaling as fast as I could and sped away from the area. I never wanted to go near that place again after that. But that's not the end of the story. 2 years after that strange event, I'd completely forgotten about what happened. I convinced myself I was so scared only because I was still a kid, and I did my best to brush it away. One day, I told one of my horror-loving friends about it, and immediately he wanted to go and see it for himself. I thought he'd say that, and I was ready for it. Rather, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that I was hoping he'd answer that way, honestly. We planned to go that very night around the same time I saw the shadowy figures, which was around 2 a.m. And so, Kudo, Yoshida, and myself found ourselves standing in front of that abandoned house in question later that night. I took the lead, and as I reached out to open the gate, it opened smoother than I'd expected. The moment I stepped inside, one of my friends screamed hysterically behind me. I turned around and both were sitting on the ground, pointing over my shoulder with their mouths opening and closing but no words coming out. Seeing that, I lost all desire to turn around and see what they were pointing at. I grabbed both of them, pulling them up and then running from the scene. Yet, we couldn't keep running forever, and at some point, we lost sight of Kudo. Yoshida and I were too afraid to go look for him, and in the end, we each went our separate ways home. The sky grew light, and the sun started to rise over the horizon. When I went to school that morning, both Kudo and Yoshida were there, so I asked them about what happened the night before. Yet, neither of them said a word. In the end, starting from that same day, Kudo and I saw less and less of each other. But it wasn't just me, and a week after our visit to that abandoned house, he stopped coming to school altogether. Yoshida and I felt responsible for leaving him alone and decided to visit his house that evening to see him. We went over after school and rang the doorbell several times, but nobody answered. Seemed nobody was home. Just as we were about to leave, a dirty-looking, middle-aged man stopped us. "Hey, do you know the people who live here?" "Yes." "Are you Kudo-kun's friends?" "Yes." "What are your names?" "Why do we have to tell you?" Then the man took something out of his pocket and showed it to us. It was a police ID card. the residents of this house were all found somewhere else. I don't know if you kids know or not, but if you go straight north from here, there's a place called Asunaru Danchi, near the radio tower. There's an old house up there that, for some reason or another, they've never knocked down. The day before yesterday, it was burnt down. Did you kids know about that? There were fire trucks everywhere, right? You really don't know anything about it? Well, never mind. Anyway, they found the dead bodies of Kudo's family inside the remains of that house. Of course, the bodies were burnt too, but we don't know if that's the cause of death yet. Kudo-kun was found tied to a chair, however, but his head had been cut off. There was something drawn on the floor around him like a circle, and his head was placed on a chair opposite, facing him. His parents were found in each other's arms in the bathroom, dead. Just how much did this man plan on telling us? He continued speaking with the occasional inviting smile as we both trembled in fear. Well, if you hear anything, contact us at the station. I think they were murdered, and there's a possibility that someone from your school is involved. Having said that, he wrote the station's phone number down on a piece of paper, handed it to us, and then left. I crumpled the paper up and threw it away. Neither Yoshida nor I could believe that our friend was dead. We couldn't believe that the man had shot his mouth off so much and was a real police officer. I decided to ask Yoshida about something that was bothering me. Of course, I was worried about Kudo's family, and I wanted to confirm that the abandoned house really had burnt down, but most of all, I wanted to know what Yoshida had seen that night. Hey, what did you see over there that night? It was a massive shadow. That's what I saw too. Seriously? I don't know if it was the same thing you saw, but either way, it was terrifying. Seriously, it was massive. And it was pointing right at Kudo. I don't know if it actually had a finger to point or not, but it was pointing at him. Seriously. Having said that much, Yoshida suddenly closed his mouth. And? What? I didn't really want to say anything, but that shadow had your face. Seriously, it was huge. I have no idea what that means. I still can't believe that it happened, and I don't want to believe that it happened. A few days later, we attended the funeral for Kudo's family, and before long, Yoshida and I stopped seeing each other as well. No progress was made into the case regarding their deaths, but for some reason, it appeared in the newspaper 3 years later. I've never told anyone about what happened since then, or rather, it's like I can't. Like the story has been sealed away. These days, I'm living life just fine. But every now and then, I remember that strange incident. And then I start to wonder about what happened to that giant shadow with my face. Summer is a great time to go biking, and the 3 boys in this next story decide to go for a ride around Shikoku. The area they decide to visit is known for strange occurrences, and they're hoping for a good story to tell their friends once the summer break is over. Perhaps they should have been careful what they wished for. Find out why in Junior High Shikoku Trip. It was the summer of my 2nd grade of junior high. I went to a school in the countryside of Tokushima, and this period was generally the most boring for a junior high student. I was in the judo club, but there were only 5 of us, and we were all in the 2nd grade. Not only that, but our coach was pretty half-assed, and we only had light training for the first 5 days of the summer holidays, and then we were free for the rest of the month. As such, myself and two of my good friends, Oyama and Watarai, decided to ride around Shikoku on our bikes. After we finished club practice on the final morning, I took the map of Shikoku from my parents' car and we rode to a nearby shrine. There we ate ice cream and, while we chatted, decided where we'd go. We really wanted to go somewhere that we could boast about once the summer holidays ended. After discussing several possibilities, Oyama suggested we follow Yoshino River up to the Iya Valley. Iya is the general name for the area on the western edge of Tokushima, and it's one of Japan's most secluded regions. Muroto Cape and Takamatsu were also suggested, but the word secluded drew us in, and we decided to spend roughly a week exploring the area. On the day of departure, the three of us met in front of the school gate at 6 a.m. It took us about half the day to reach Yoshino River. If things had gone better, it would have only taken us 2 hours, but we were the weak judo club members after all. Plus, we took breaks every 20 minutes and we stopped at every sweet store we came across. We arrived somewhere near the middle of the river. The roads weren't very wide, nor were they easy to bike on. The area was full of cicadas and night was about to fall. We should find somewhere to sleep. I'm tired. We looked around for a bit, but we couldn't find anywhere suitable. We didn't have a tent, nor sleeping bags, and the weather looked to be taking a turn for the worse, so we had to find somewhere that at least had a bench or a roof over our heads. Yet there was nothing but the rustic countryside, the gloomy sky, and the river's surface nearby. There was nothing else we could do, so we continued riding as night approached. Before long, the river disappeared and we found ourselves surrounded by more and more greenery. I think we should go back and find a house that will let us stay the night, the cowardly Watarai said. Yet Oyama and I didn't want to waste the time we'd already spent riding this far, so we kept going. Finally, the road ended. At some point it started going uphill, so we were exhausted and we'd wasted all that time. The sky had already darkened, and other than the torch Watarai brought, there was no other light. On top of that, a light rain started to fall. As the rain soaked our hair, we debated which way to go. To our left looked rough, but the asphalt road continued on. However, there was no light, so we couldn't see very far. The right suddenly turned off to a gravel road, but deep in the trees, a faint light shone in the distance. It was impossible to tell whether it was a street light or a house. At any rate, we decided to go that way, against Watarai's wishes, of course, and started down the barely 1 meter wide road in silence. At that time, it must have been around 8 p.m. Around 30 minutes later, the road turned off into a small animal trail. We followed it, riding through numerous spider webs and constantly surrounded by strange bugs. Forest expanded up the mountain to our right, while to our left a cliff ran down to a small stream at the bottom. Everything was dark and everything sucked. However, that light in the distance was closer than before. Our one ray of hope in this shitty situation. Finally, we realized what it was. It was nothing more than a single electric light, and Watarai started crying. Oyama, feeling responsible, desperately searched the area. As I tried to cheer Watarai up, Oyama yelled in the distance, "Hey! There's an abandoned house over here!" We'd passed over the mountain peak, so we were surrounded by mountains, and in the darkness, a single light on the side of the dirty road shone down. The rain continued to fall, and the air was warm. Why on earth is there a light all the way out here? I thought. Watarai and I made our way through the grass towards Oyama's voice. It seemed that, long ago, this had once been a path. The grass there was different to the rest of the area. Before long, we found both Oyama and the creepy house in the middle of nowhere. Since it was made of wood, it was in pretty bad shape, but it had held up well, all things considered. We were scared, but it might have somewhere we could get out of the rain, so we were relieved. Watarai shone his light on the area, but then he suddenly froze and stopped the light somewhere beyond Oyama. I was standing next to him, so I looked over. It was shining on an area just away from the house. He continued shining the light on that one spot. Neither of us moved. "What's wrong?" "We need to check out the rest," I said. But then, Watarai suddenly burst into tears again and tried to run. We calmed him down, and once he could talk again, he told us what happened. "There was a girl over there." Huh? That was the first thing I thought. After that, Watarai insisted like a child that he wanted to go home. But with the weather being like it was, we convinced him we should at least stay the night first. Somehow we calmed him down and went inside. The house sat at the bottom of a cliff, with dense forest on either side. The roof was full of holes, but it was still a roof, and there was one section of the floor that remained standing. The pillars were in a bad way, and the sliding doors and entrance were completely gone, so we had a rather good view of the surrounding area. Watarai couldn't stop looking at where he'd apparently seen the little girl. "She's still there, staring at us." It was creepy, but we were exhausted, so all I wanted to do was go to sleep. Oyama's watch said it was already past 11 p.m. We laid down on the dirty floor and I was asleep within minutes. Suddenly I woke up. I think I must have been asleep for about 3 hours. Oyama and Watarai were still asleep, and Watarai was snoring. He must have been really exhausted after his scare earlier. I needed to pee, so I stepped off the floored area. It was no longer raining, and the moon poked its face through the clouds. After admiring the scenery for a bit, I stepped away from the house and walked over to the trees to do my business. I couldn't speak. 3 yellow lights, just like the moon above me, danced about in the trees. I couldn't move. It was the first time in my life that had ever happened to me. And something was on my back. It touched my chest. It was like a child sitting on my back, reaching their hands around me. Then something whispered by my ear. "Leave this place." Even now, I still clearly remember it. It was the dry voice of a girl. It seemed we'd entered somewhere we really shouldn't have. "Okay, I'm sorry," I chanted silently, and when the weight finally lifted, I could move again. Then it started to rain again, and I rushed back to the house. It was even heavier than before. I felt uncomfortable leaving in the midst of all this, but I woke Oyama and Watarai up and told them what happened. "It's gonna kill us!" They were scared, of course, but we put our raincoats on and left the area. A heavy rain fell, and lightning lit the sky. Then, as we got on our bikes and prepared to leave, a low, terrifying sound rumbled behind us. What the hell? We turned around and some boulders about 50 centimeters high started rolling down the cliff behind the house, followed by a mass of earth that buried the building. With a crunching sound, the house was swallowed whole. "Run!" We ran as fast as we could. The landslide was so big that a tiny stone hit me in the head as we fled, drawing blood, and something cut Oyama's leg as well. But if we hadn't left that house, things would have been much, much worse. Dumbfounded, I slumped beside my bike in the rain. The rain lifted as the sun rose, and a gorgeous sun shone in the east. That girl from yesterday helped us, huh? We ran into a local that next morning, so we asked them about the house. Apparently the earth in that area was loose and landslides were a common occurrence. We also asked him about the little girl, and apparently there was a local legend about a good spirit who lived in the area, so maybe that was her. I still get chills when I think about it now, about what might have happened if we didn't run into that little girl. After that, we were safely able to reach Iya to do our sightseeing, and then we returned home. Although, we did run into another strange occurrence or two on the way. You gotta hand it to Shikoku, huh? Japanese ghosts love water. They're attracted to it. They hang around it. It's said to be the conduit through which they pass in and out of this world. So, it makes sense that they would also like hot springs, right? But what if you suddenly found yourself in a hot spring with a figure that didn't look quite human? What would you do? Find out in Open Air Bath Woman. The love my family has for hot springs is unrivaled, so much so that whenever we all have a day off, we always visit one. We always go to the same place, the hot spring district the next town over. Today, we are going to visit the hot spring at this hotel. Today, we're going to visit the open air bath at this location. We always decide depending on our feelings that day. This story I'm about to tell you happened in that hot spring district 6 years ago. On this particular day, we decided to go to a popular open-air hot spring so we could enjoy the leaves changing colour for autumn. There aren't many other customers around during the day, so we were the only people there. Finally, we were able to get in. I was so excited. The weather was great, and I was excited to enjoy the outside air from the hot spring. I made my way towards the changing rooms with Mum right away. Baskets were neatly lined up inside, and it was clean as well. In high spirits, I started to undress when Mum suddenly said, "Ah, I forgot something in the car. I'll be right back." Jeez, she's always like this, I muttered as she left me alone in the room, but I was so excited about the hot spring that I didn't care. I wanted to quickly get changed and hit the water, and as my hand reached for my button, the atmosphere in the room suddenly changed. Up until a moment ago, everything had felt bright and cheerful, but now, the air felt heavy around me. Ugh, what the hell? Still, I just wanted to get into the water, so I finished getting changed and made my way outside. The air was refreshing and crisp, and after a quick wash, I jumped into the hot spring. I closed my eyes and let the water wash over me. Ah, hot springs really are the best. When I opened my eyes again, a white mist floated in front of me. I could see a dim figure on the other side. Huh? When did they get here? I thought. Sure, my eyes had been closed, but you would think I would hear someone's footsteps as they approached the water, or the sound of them getting in. I didn't notice a thing. The figure looked grey, and although I couldn't see very well through the mist, looked to be a woman as well. It was the women's bath, so that was natural. Her hair was tied up on top of her head, and she looked to be young, maybe in her late 20s or early 30s. I scooped some of the water and dropped it over my shoulder. continuing to watch the woman. Is she here alone, or did she come here with a boyfriend? I closed my eyes, getting lost in my imagination, and when I opened them again, I suddenly broke out in goosebumps. The figure was gone. I'd only closed my eyes for a second or two, and I didn't hear a single thing. I no longer felt like sitting in the water any longer. I hurried out of the bath and looked towards the changing room. Someone was inside. It was the woman from before. Seriously, she just got out like any other normal person. Jeez. I was relieved and reached for the door handle when I suddenly felt a presence behind me. I turned around and that figure from before was there, in the empty hot spring. Ah! I screamed and rushed into the changing room, quickly getting dressed and rushing back outside. I ran into my mother in the lobby. "What's wrong?" she said when she saw me running, so I told her what had just happened. The person working the front desk came over at that exact moment. "So you saw it too?" "I've heard the same complaint from several of our customers recently." People had only ever seen her. She'd never done anything, but several people had complained about seeing a ghost near the water. I never went back to that hot spring again after that, but from a certain point of view, that hot spring was apparently so famous that even ghosts couldn't keep themselves away from it. Our final story this week is about a young boy who goes out for a walk in an unknown area and gets lost. He stumbles across an abandoned house that might not be as abandoned as it seems. Find out why in From the Empty Storm Shudder. This story is still terrifying and mysterious to me. When I was in elementary school, my parents left me to stay with an older woman they knew while they went out to run some errands. That woman had a Shiba Inu, and to kill some time that first day, I took the dog out for a walk. I ended up getting lost as we walked around because I had no sense of the land. I was shy, so I couldn't ask strangers for help, and the dog was of no use either. We wandered around until the sun set. Yet, as we were passing a certain house, the dog suddenly stopped moving and wouldn't budge. I tried lifting him, but he was far heavier than I was expecting. Brought to a standstill, I stopped to look at the house. It looked like two buildings joined in the middle. I was big into collecting bugs at the time, so I dragged the dog into the long grass there, wondering if I might find something nice, like a praying mantis in there. I sifted through the grass for a while, and when it got really dark, I realized what a bad situation I was in. I lifted my head, and most of the storm shutters on the empty house were closed, but there was a single one right in front of me that was open. A woman stared at me from the open window. I don't remember what she looks like now, but it was definitely a woman. Her eyes were closed, and she shook her head left to right. The movement terrified me. I tried to scream and then fell backwards, tearing out of the yard as fast as I could. I don't remember how I got back to the woman's house, but when I told her about the woman at the empty house, tears streaming down my face, she got angry and grabbed some clippers to shave my head. Then some strange old man came around and started chanting around me. She even called my parents, and they rushed back over, and it all became this massive thing. I never went back to that woman's house again, and I don't think her dog returned either. I'm sorry, ma'am. This all came to mind again recently, but really, what on earth did I see that night? If you'd like to chat about this week's stories, come and join us in the Kowabana Discord. You can find that link in the description or on kowabana.net. And don't forget to check out our Patreon at patreon.com/TaraADevlin for exclusive bonus stories and other extras. Or check out our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Kowabana Japan for all sorts of Japanese horror you won't find anywhere else. Thanks guys, stay safe, and I'll see you again next time for even more Kowabana, true Japanese scary stories from around the internet. Want even more scary stories? Head over to kowabana.net for new translations every week. You can also join our Patreon for exclusive stories you won't find anywhere else. Head over to kowabana.net now.